Welcome back to Your Friend in Food, the podcast about the meals that made us and the memories they carry. Today's guest is someone who's made an enormous impact on how Caribbean food is shared and preserved online. Chris De La Rosa of CaribbeanPot.com. Chris was the first person I saw post a recipe for Pikliz, that fiery, tangy Haitian condiment I grew up eating at home but never saw written down, let alone online. For so many of us, his recipes have been a lifeline, a connection to culture, history, and home. He's really passionate about preserving Caribbean culinary legacy for the next generation and making it accessible for those who didn't grow up with those dishes at home. Talking to Chris feels like catching up with your neighbor on the front porch. He's generous with his stories, deeply rooted in tradition, and knows how to bring warmth to every word. It's no surprise his readers feel so connected to him. In this episode, we talk about honoring heritage, sharing knowledge, and why food can be one of the most powerful tools for cultural preservation. Let's get into it. I'm so excited to have you here with me to talk about all things related to who you are, how food has showed up in your life. So I thank you so much for being here, Chris.
Sandy, when you reached out to me, I had no choice but to say yes because I love the energy. I love everything about what you're doing. And I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but you've coached me quite a bit over the years. We've known each other as well too. So it's certainly my pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So I'm going to just jump right into I have so many questions. Chris, you talk about a lot about food memories. So this is just like the perfect place to talk to you today. What
Yeah.
was your kitchen like growing up? What was that like?
Wow. Typical Caribbean kitchen, countryside kitchen, where first of all, the heat, and it was a galvanized roof, so it was hot in there, but back in my time, we didn't have so much humidity in the Caribbean. I guess over time, climate change and
Oh,
everything, so we always had an open window, so the wind would be going through. So whether you were in the kitchen or outside, you would get the scent, the smell of whatever mom was cooking, whether it was lunch, breakfast, dinner, whatever it was. So it was always the smells, and not just the smells, it's the noise you would hear, like when, and we use the word chunky, and chunky is when you heat the oil and you add something to the oil and you get that sizzle sound.
yeah.
Or it was about timing as well, too. So my brother and I would be playing in the backyard, and the same chunky noise, you also end the dish with it. So something like a yellow split peas dal, we knew it was done when we would hear that noise. And what she would do, she would toss in the fried garlic and jeera into the pot with the dal and put the lid on quickly to let the smoke and the steam remain in there to flavor dal. And we would hear the and the slam of the pot lid, and we're like, "Yep, food is just about done." So it was so many different senses where it wasn't just about your nose, it was also your ears, and then it was about your vision as well too. Mommy always allowed us to be part of what she was doing, not so much forcibly, but she wanted us to be aware of what she was doing and the steps. We would always look on Saturday night, Saturday evening. She would season the meats that she would stew in, because Sunday lunch is the biggest meal in the Caribbean on the islands, right? And she would season the meats on a Saturday evening. And it was about all the colors in there, from the peppers to the onions to the tomato to all those different colors in there, the green seasoning. And then we would get to smell it before she put it in the fridge to marinate. So it was a combination of vision, smell, hearing, all these different elements.
Just how you're describing it, there's so much sensory overload
Yeah.
I'm having. It's about the sights, the smells, the sounds of the kitchen. And when we think about it, in the moment, we don't realize
Yeah.
that all of those things are happening. That's why food and memory are so intrinsically connected.
Yeah.
Because when we think about it, it's like our eyes go up and all these things come back to our recollection, back to our memory. So growing up, were there any dishes that were like a rite of passage that you had to learn how to make growing up?
It's funny you should ask that. About a month ago, when I moved to Canada, I live with my aunt and my cousins, my younger Sophia and Darren, and my aunt worked two jobs, typical Caribbean or immigrant story in North America. So I was home with them and we would make something called hot dog and sauce, which is you would take hot dogs or Vienna sausages and you would fry it with onions, tomato, a bit of tomato ketchup. And that would be either lunch or breakfast with some bread you would dip and eat. And my little cousins and her friends would come over and they would ask me to make it. Fast forward 30 years later, Jenny, one of her friends, she now lives on the east coast of Canada. She emailed me to ask me, what was that thing with the hot dogs you used to make for us? So it wasn't just about me, it was also, I passed it on as well, too. So that first thing you learn to cook in the Caribbean is probably a fried egg. I think they call it sausage as breakfast sausages or Vienna sausages. I'm not sure what it, but we call it hot dog and sauce. All of my daughters, they've all learned to make that. And it's something that because it's your first thing you learn to cook, it brings you to a happy place as well when you do. But for the odd time as an adult, chicken sausages or whatever it is, it's very cheap. I make it and I'm so satisfied by eating this. So the first thing I learned, and I think most Caribbean kids learn, is that hot dog and sauce.
You know what's so funny? I was just looking at this Vienna sausage recipe on your blog like yesterday, last night. I was looking at it and I loved it because I didn't even know that about certain islands. And then
Yeah.
right in your blog, you always have that story. And so I saw that story about your daughters, and that's something that you would always make for them. And they called it the hot dogs and sauce. It's so funny you mentioned. I was just looking at that yesterday.
Coincidentally, if you know how into TikTok you are, but recently, I think about 2 weeks ago, maybe a little bit longer, maybe 3 weeks ago, there was a trend on there with the Mexican hot dog trend where they put hot dogs and they were, it's exactly what we were doing, except they were doing it the whole hot dog. So it's even, you look at where we are in the Caribbean, but then you look at Mexico where it is, and they also do the same thing. And I'm sure other places do it as well, too.
Absolutely. There's always this tie that binds across cultures. Maybe you call it something else, maybe use the ingredients a little bit differently, but there's these fundamental things exist across cultures, which as I talk to more people, in my mind, I'm making associations, and maybe people who are listening are also making associations in their own experience and culture too. So that's cool. And you cook what you know, and that's Caribbean food. And what do you think is one thing about Caribbean food culture that a lot of people misunderstand?
Spicy. Everyone thinks it's spicy and we can't handle it. I read a report a few years ago that 28 million tourists visited the Caribbean. And it would be countries like Jamaica, Barbados, Dominican Republic, and everywhere else. And it doesn't matter where in the Caribbean you go, you will end up at a jerk pit on the resorts. And it's going to be spicy. There's Scotch bonnet pepper in there. So a lot of people exposure to Caribbean food via travel would be spicy. But I'll tell you this, the majority, not I wouldn't say the majority, but at least 50% of the people who watch my videos and who are in tune with Caribbean food, they will tell you they don't eat spicy food. They don't eat the Scotch bonnet pepper. And it's quite normal. So the sort of myth is that our food is spicy. Yes, it can be spicy, but it's as with everything else. You can take a recipe and tailor it to your own liking as well. So I think people need to understand that don't be intimidated or be fooled by a myth that our food is spicy. There's so many other levels of flavor to our food that spicy is just one of those elements.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to the fact that's one thing I like about your recipes too, because in almost all of your recipes, you always say adjust it to your taste.
Yeah.
If you're going to use Scotch bonnet peppers, take out the seeds because that's where all the heat lives. So if you don't want a lot of heat, or in the recipe, even though you put a Scotch bonnet pepper in it, you take it out.
A testament to our food not being overly spicy or always being spicy is the amount of different hot sauces or pepper sauces we have as side condiments, everything we eat. So if you want it spicy, you have and you have Haitian background, you would have Pikliz, and that's a little bit spicy as well too, because
Yeah,
there's peppers and onion and everything else in there. So we also have that on the sides. So if you do want spicy, you can add it while you're eating as well too.
absolutely. Speaking of pickles, one of my favorite things ever. Actually, I share it with all of my non-Haitian friends whenever I can.
Yeah.
When my mom comes to visit me wherever I am, even when I was in China, she bought 2 large jars of pickles for me. So it's definitely something that's great. And that's one of the things when I first found your blog, I found it because of the pickles recipe you had on your
Yeah.
website. And my mind was blown because I've been trying to ask my mom for this recipe for decades. And it's great that you are able to really share recipes, not just for those of us who want to replicate these recipes that we grew up with, but also for people who are discovering it for the first time. So I know you told this story a million times, but what inspired you to start Caribbean Pot in the first place, and what did you hope it would become?
It wasn't meant to become anything other than a sort of a diary or a catalog of recipes for my daughters. Yes, they are 100% Canadian, born and bred in Canada, but our kitchen was a sort of a mini Caribbean, a mini Trinidad and Tobago, where most of the dishes I cooked they were either traditional or had some sort of influence from my upbringing. The problem with back in 2009 and before, even 5 years later, now we're seeing a huge shift where there are cookbooks dedicated to Caribbean food. There wasn't any such thing. Recipes were an older culture, so it was passed on verbally over the years. And even today, if I were to call my mom and ask her to make something, she still gives me the pinch of this and a little bit of that. And you're going to taste it, son, and those kind of things. So I started documenting the recipes my daughters were growing up with eating because I know at some point they were going to head off to university and they would want to cook the stuff that they were accustomed to eating. So I started documenting it. And my background was in internet marketing consulting. And I knew a lot about search engine optimization and everything else. So I started implementing what I knew onto the website. So the elements I was trying to do was tell a story, document the recipe, and dumb it down or make it foolproof. And because of what I did, and you said you stumbled across the Pikliz and you're like, you used it because it was the closest thing you had to following step by step instructions. And because of the work I did, the search engines picked it up and the rest is history. Since 2009, I've connected with millions of people all over the world because of something I created for my daughters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just shared the Pickles recipes with someone in Minnesota the other day. So they're definitely a really great way to preserve the digital recipe in a place where it's super shareable. In the innovative age that we're living in, it's a really
Yeah.
great opportunity to do that.
The funny thing about that is over the years, I've had to explain to people that yes, sometimes I run into problems when, for instance, let's take the Scotch bonnet pepper, for instance. In Trinidad, where I grew up, we would just call that hot pepper or Congo pepper or
Mhm.
something like that. We never use the word Scotch bonnet pepper. No, because I'm connecting with a global audience, I
Mhm.
purposely use the terms that a global audience would be able to recognize and identify.
Absolutely.
So while I make the recipes accessible, I also found myself with a big problem with traditionalists who want to be called a certain way. I try to explain, I'm not only doing it for you, man, I'm doing it for everybody now.
It's funny growing up, there were certain ingredients I didn't know the English word to
Yeah.
because when my mom was cooking, I would just know the Haitian word. And once I started working in food and learning the English words or the more global versions, I now understood how those ingredients could be used in
Yeah.
different recipes. So there is also a benefit to understanding like where these ingredients show up
Yeah.
in other places. So it's great that you do that to make it more inclusive and more broad. You make a lot of recipes, you're cranking out recipes all the time. and they're full of stories, they're full of meaning. Is there a recipe or a video that has a deeper personal story to you than people may realize?
I think about 5 or 6 years ago, I tried to replicate, and I've tried many times, but this time I actually did a video and everything else of my mom's curry kingfish. It was close, but still, there's something missing, and I couldn't figure out what it was missing. As far as one standing out, giving with deeper meaning, it would have been that one.
What was it about your mom's curry kingfish that even made you attempt to make it for your Pilau?
For clarification, and for being honest, yeah, I must say, growing up on the islands where we're surrounded by water and some of the most excellent fish, I hated fish as a child growing up. Not until
Oh.
my late teens into my 20s, being in Canada, not having access to fresh fish, not having access to my mom's curry kingfish.
Mhm.
My mom started coming to visit and then she started making it. And I'm like, wow, this is what it tasted like all these years. And I didn't enjoy it. What about it? I guess her being visiting us in Canada, making it for us, and me looking back now and thinking, why didn't I eat it all these years? And there's quite a few recipes like that, like okra. Okra, as we say okra. She does an okra with saltfish, and that is something I never wanted as a child. Her stewed pumpkin with shrimp, I never liked, but now you can give me that every day and I'll eat it. Mind you, she still makes bitter melon, or what we call karali, and I will not put that in my mouth. Even as an adult, I will not eat it. But I guess there's something comforting about it. I don't know what it is that's so comforting about that curry kingfish. And I've been asked in another interview what my last meal would be if I had to choose one. And it would probably be a simple dish of curry kingfish with roti or even with rice, slice of avocado, some watercress, and some pepper sauce on the side.
Wow, you just said that real fast. You know what it's gonna be. You already know.
It's one of the things you could envision it on that plate already. Because
Yeah.
you've had it so many times and it brings back such a pleasant memory and feeling and everything else. Sandy, my mom and dad, they winter in the Caribbean because my mom hates the winter, the cold. She breaks out in hives and all this stuff. Right?
Mhm.
From the end of December, early January into maybe April, they're in the Caribbean. And mommy knows I love her curry kingfish so much that she makes it, freezes it, and I have it in my freezer. I used the last one, I think maybe about 3 weeks ago. They're back now, so I'm going to get my new allotment pretty soon, but it's always in the freezer.
That's awesome. Speaking about tradition and culture, one thing I noticed about you is that you always wear your steel drum pendant. So tell me, it's not like the traditional, you're in food. It's not like chef knives or something. What is it about this steel drum pendant and how does it relate to your food memories, how you approach cooking and food and culture in the Caribbean?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of steel pan. I'm a huge part of my culture, which the steel pan was invented in Trinidad and Tobago. And what people don't realize, you can play from R&B to hip hop to soca to classical music. Think Beethoven and
Mhm.
all those guys can be played on steel pan. And when my sister used to visit us in the early 90s, she would always bring, back then it was cassette tapes. She would bring cassette tapes for me of the latest steel pan arrangements, carnival time. And I've always loved pan. It ties me to being home. Once I started Caribbean pop, and this is by the way, the necklace that you're speaking about is mommy asked me if I wanted something from home when I left home. And I told her I wanted a steel pan, the pendant. Sure enough, I've been wearing it since then. Almost 30 years later, I'm still wearing it. And I wear it with a lot of pride because it is our national instrument and it really puts me in a happy place whenever I'm down. I listen to steel pan, and most times I don't collect music, but I go onto the YouTube or wherever it is and I listen to it. And starting CaribbeanPod.com, I'm glad people identified because yes, you go throughout the Caribbean, the steel pan is there. But if you know anything about the history and all that, it identifies me as being from Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm sharing recipes from my upbringing, from being born in Trinidad and Tobago, but for the general Caribbean I represent. So it allows me to tell people a little bit of, if they know where I'm from. Because a lot of times, oh, is he from Guyana? Is he from Barbados? It's always where he's from. And the final thing I want to say about steel pan is coming up to carnival time, which is the Monday and Tuesday before Ash Wednesday every year. We tend to believe in the Caribbean, in Trinidad, we have the best carnival in the world, which I would probably say yes.
That's
I've
a
been to
big
many.
debate.
It is, yeah. We have steel pan finals. So all the different groups from different regions in Trinidad would get together and they would have a competition. Who's going to be the best pan side, as they call it. Every time you go to steel pan semis, which is in the Port of Spain in the Queen's Park Savannah, one of the things you see there, Sandy, is people would cook food and bring it because it's an all day, all night affair. So you bring a cooler with food cooked and you would eat and drink and listen to the band play. And you probably have 40 bands playing and stuff like that. But one of the key dishes they make is something called chicken pilau. It's like a one pot rice and meat dish, right? And you look around and it tells you how people cook, from the consistency from wet to dry. Everybody has their preference, and the color, how long you stewed the meats first. So you will see a dark amber, you will see a brown, you will see a light color. And if you have a light color pilau, people will say, boy, your pilau need a tan. It's a little too light. But it's that food memory. And again, it comes back to food.
Yeah, from someone who doesn't really understand Caribbean culture, they might not understand, what does a steel pan have to do with food? But it's really it's very intertwined. Music, food, culture, everything is really connected. Thanks so
Yeah.
much for sharing that. Now it's 2025. How do you balance honoring traditional techniques with the reality of cooking in a modern kitchen?
Wow, that's an interesting question. And I never give talk to. I still have, look like my old swizzle stick. You look at some of the tools I use is very much old school Caribbean, because in sharing the recipes, I also want to think I'm curating it as well, to where I want to show people where we came from. You look something like an immersion blender, which I do have, versus a swizzle stick. If you use a swizzle stick, you do a back and forth motion, and the shape of it, it breaks down the soups and stews. And if you're making callaloo soup, it would break down the spinach and okra and everything else. Now, if you use an immersion blender, what I tell people is, yes, you will get a smooth consistency. You can control the consistency you get, but you must pulse it. So when I do use something that's modern versus something that's old school, I try to tell them how to use it efficiently to replicate, because food is not only about flavor and taste and look, it's also about texture as well too. So if you leave that immersion blender going for too long, you end up with something that's frothy or foamy and the texture is totally off, and it changes by adding air into it. It changes the viscosity and the overall flavor of well too.
That's
So
true.
it's one of those things. It's where you can use modern equipment, but use it smart as well too. Did sous vide a few times, and everybody's, well, that's not real cooking. You're boiling. You're not really boiling it. You're just getting it to a certain temperature, and then you got to finish it off, especially with meats and stuff like that. So explaining to people that yes, we can take the flavors of the Caribbean, use modern equipment, and get a dish sort of replicate something that we have in the Caribbean is the sort of bridge that I try to use.
Yeah, and I think that it's really important to approach it in that balanced way, because we are in an age where I remember being in Haiti in the summer with my grandma. She had to wake up at 4 a.m., and she's is very hands-on making things for lunch.
Ye-
So not breakfast, because that lunch is the biggest meal of the day.
Yeah.
In many parts, the lifestyles that we live here, or even in this year, this in 2025, we are working, we're trying to make this in 30 minutes or less. So, how do we understand the structure of food without compromising the texture of the flavor, and still use these tools that are at our disposal? Because certainly, I think I can speak for my grandma and say if she didn't have to wake up at 4 a.m., she probably would. be okay with that if there was a tool that she could use to speed up the process.
It's funny you should mention that about speed up the process. From the time of birth, mommy had us believing that the pressure cooker would explode and kill everybody in the house. So she never used a pressure cooker. To this day, I hardly ever use a pressure. I quicker go to a slow cooker, put it there and you forget it. You do what you got to do
Right.
all day, you come back and it's done. And because, like Granny, waking up early and knowing that long process of cooking, a lot of our foods can be cooked in a slow cooker as well. It can be stuck in the oven and let it go on its own there as well too. So it's one of those things people got to understand as well too, that you don't really have to be there babysitting it as it cooks for quite a bit of the stuff that we do make.
Yeah, it's good to know all of those options are there. You often share your story, which is what I love. The stories tied to the food that you make and share. Have you ever had moments where someone shared your content, your recipes, and it in a way that it impacted their connection to home or family?
Oh man, countless times. The one that really stands out though is it wasn't so much about using the recipe, but hearing me, my voice. Years ago, I got an email from a fan saying that I think the little fellow was either 1 or 2 years old, and when they would bath him and feed him and put him to bed, and they would play my YouTube videos, and he would fall asleep to my voice. I was blown away. About 10, 12 years later, I'm in the mall and this person comes up to me. Well, it turns out it was the same lady who had contacted me. The little guy is probably 12, 13 years old now, and here he is, kind of thing. So that story sticks with me that my voice used to put this little guy to sleep, right? I don't know if it's a good or bad thing that I'm making people fall asleep, but I'm just thinking maybe it's a soothing voice. I don't know, but I've had many stories. Mommy passed away and we were able to replicate this dish for daddy and he cried when he ate it. I'm read into a Caribbean family and you saved my marriage. So many of those. I'm in university and it's exactly why I created the website for my daughters. Kids in university and they grow up now. And the website's been around since 2009. So they all have families now too that they're passing on the recipes too. And so there are many stories like that, but the one with the little guy that really it still gives me a smile, man, to know that even my voice was helping.
Yeah, that's a really great story. And it just shows the impact of all the energy that you bring to everything that you're doing. And energy doesn't necessarily need to be excitable, but the passion, the thoughtfulness, and then it resonates with people on so many different levels. I can definitely relate to at first not when you told your story about not ever liking fish, and
Yeah.
only when you left home, I didn't really appreciate all the great food my mom was cooking at home growing up, and it was only when I moved away, when I moved abroad, and I couldn't access those recipes anymore,
Yeah.
I really came to appreciate, all the things that she would do. So even the other day, I asked my mom when she comes to visit me this time to help show me how to make some epis, 'cause I need to know how to make that and
Mhm.
it's just to be able to experience those flavors more often. I think it's great that it's still resonating with them, your recipes and content in ways you didn't expect.
You look at my daughter, Kiana, last year, her and her fiance went to Poland to visit his family. He's from Poland, maybe born in Canada, but his mom is still living in Poland and stuff like that. And I think they were gone for a month. And week two into it, she's WhatsApping me. I want to come home. I miss your food. And I'm like, why don't you cook some food for them and stuff like that? She goes, I can't find the ingredients and I can't read the labels. She just missed that food that she grew up with, right?
Yeah, I one thing that I love about your recipes, I think it's something that you mentioned to me in the past is what is the basis for any recipe that you make when it comes to the ingredients that people need to find?
The thing is, it's all about technique. All I'm saying is I go to the same grocery stores that everybody in North America and Europe goes to. It's just that we're taking the same ingredients that you would buy there and we're applying a different technique to it, a technique born out of tradition in the Caribbean, whether it's the English speaking, French speaking, Dutch, Spanish speaking Caribbean. The point is, I'm giving you a different method of using those same ingredients. And we got to give thanks. I look at what I do and exposure I get and stuff like that. But you got to give thanks to the Food Network and everybody else who's highlighting the fact that there are foods from all over the world and people are daring enough to try. Yeah, I was having a recent discussion there with a good friend, and we spoke about how fish sauce is becoming a common ingredient like soy sauce in most homes now.
Mm,
Fish sauce, of all
mhm.
things. I remember sharing a recipe recently, and someone sent me a direct message and said, Chris, how about putting a bit of fish sauce in there? I'm like, yes, it works, but you don't think people have it, but they do
Yeah.
have it now. So,
Yeah. It's
and
becoming
you
more
know,
accessible.
it's testament to all the immigrants who come and make North America and everywhere else their home as well too, because we don't come freeloading. We come and we give and we work hard and everything else. So it's part of that.
Absolutely.
It's part of that sharing.
Absolutely. And I'm so thankful to have been exposed, even though my family's from Haiti and I grew up in Miami, there's so much of the Caribbean diaspora that I haven't even experienced yet too. The fact that there's so many, you have like thousands of recipes, which just goes to show how much variety exists across the Caribbean islands, and there's so much there to explore and experience. And I love the fact that you say you don't need to live near a local Caribbean store. You can go and find the ingredients right where you live and
Yeah,
just reimagine the way you can put those ingredients together and experience them in whole new ways.
exactly.
So, when it comes to tradition and culture, what does legacy look like to you when it comes to your work and your recipe?
Wow. It's something I've been playing with. What do I want to be remembered for? Because after all, you look at CaribbeanPod.com back in 2009, there were only two people doing what I was doing, putting Caribbean food on a sort of worldwide outlet where people can access it from anywhere in the world. I think my cookbooks would stand the test of time. I think my children passing it on to their children, the recipes and stuff like that. But of course, making it their own, adding their own touch to it and stuff like that. I want when people think about me and what I did or what I'm doing, it's part of their history and their culture as well too. Because I know lately that quite a few people came on the scene and they're doing good work. I'm not going to say they're not doing good work, but I try my best to keep away from what's trending, what's going to grab attention for that 30
Mhm.
seconds on TikTok. I'm still trying to keep it authentically Caribbean. I just want to be known for sharing good recipes, easy, accessible recipes, and preserving and curating the culture that may be lost. Because from what I'm seeing when I visit the Caribbean, you look at fast food, for example, from Burger King to McDonald's to Wendy's to Subway. There's so many Subway when you go down there, and I'm like, why do we need all of this? But you can't avoid it. It will happen, but at the same time, we're losing our sort of culinary heritage as well, too, because a lot of recipes people don't remember anymore. Only recently, a good friend of mine shared a picture of a fruit. I'm only 30 years away from the Caribbean, but I already forgot the name of the fruit, and it was called lily, a little tiny little red fruit that grows in a big tree. And I'm thinking, all it takes is 30 years for us to forget something. So, legacy, it's not so much about me, but more about the food, the culture, and preserving that. I was lucky to have my grandmother on my father's side, 104 years old, on my mother's side, 99 years old. So they eat good. They eat healthy. I want people to understand that our food has a lot of history behind it and we've got to preserve.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great way to wrap up this whole idea of creating food memories. I want to ask you one last question. You mentioned your last meal on earth, but I do
Hmm.
want to ask you about comfort. So if someone handed you a plate of comfort right now, something that made you feel like home, what would be on that plate?
The most comforting thing I can eat, probably a plate of chicken pilau. Now, earlier I spoke about how it's a unique. It's a lovely one-pot dish with pigeon peas and rice, and it's stewed down in coconut milk and a lot of herbs, and there's chicken in there. Originally, I liked it dry. So there's team dry and team wet, which means it's shelly, it's grainy, the rice is grainy. But my daughters, they like it wet. So I usually make it wet now, which means a little bit more soupy. Think risotto, but not as mushy. On that plate, we'll also have, mommy also always had watercress, sliced cucumber, a huge slice of Caribbean style avocado, what we call zabuca. The big pear, the big one, not the
No,
little. And I like, a lot of people like coleslaw. I don't like coleslaw with it, but what I do is a bit of heat. And we spoke about Caribbean food being misunderstood as being spicy. This is where my heat's going to come from. Tomato choca, which is roasted tomato with crushed garlic, onions, Scotch bonnet pepper, and I spoke about chunky earlier, where you pour hot oil and it tempers everything together. I like that as my sort of side to this. It brings the heat plus the tartness of the tomato and roasting it over an open flame. The charred bits brings a bit of sweetness. So a whole combination on that plate right there. Now, typically, people would say the drink of choice would probably be a passion fruit juice, maybe an orange passion fruit juice.
love passion fruit juice.
Yeah,
Love it.
so that would be
Yeah.
my complete sort of
That's a whole
plate for the
meal.
same.
I don't think anyone has added a drink to the meal. So you're the first.
We had a shaddock tree in the backyard, which is like
Mm.
a hybrid between, it's a bigger grapefruit. And I remember growing up on shallot juice as well, too. One of those lovely citrus
Yep.
juices. It's
Yeah.
funny, we always had a lot of mango, but we never did anything with mango other than eat the mango. That's it. We never made
Right.
juices or puddings or anything.
Yeah. It's been really great to talk to you today and learn even more about your story and the way food has really influenced the way you show up in the world and also what you're sharing with others and the impact you want to make, not just today, but into the future. So thank you so much, Chris, for your time. And you made me so hungry,
Yeah.
as it often does with these conversations. But thank you so much for your time. And I'll be following you and cooking along with you offline.
Was certainly my pleasure, Sandy. And when mommy comes to visit and she makes that a piece, maybe you can share the recipe with us. Something really traditional, authentic, straight out of whatever village you were from in Haiti via Miami. But I'll be looking forward to that recipe as well, too.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Chris.
You take care.
I love this conversation with Chris, not because of his recipes, but because of the way he honors where they came from. There's something powerful about preserving the flavors we grew up with and making them feel possible for the next generation. If today's episode stirred up a food memory or reminded you of a dish that's part of your story, I hope you'll share it. Send a message, leave a review, or pass the episode along to someone who could use a little comfort for the soul. And next time, I'll be joined by Giangie Townsend of Giangie's Kitchen. She grew up with French and Italian parents and brings those food memories into everything she cooks, making home cooking feel approachable, joyful, and deeply personal. It's a conversation about heritage, creativity, and the possibilities of everyday meals. Until then, this is your friend in food. Keep capturing those food memories, and I'll see you back here soon.